Welcome to Surviving the Black Church podcast, where we shed light and bring awareness to religious trauma and dismantle oppressive systems within the Black church.
On this week's episode of Surviving the Black Church podcast, Jonathon, Hugh, and Nikki continue the conversation of similarities of narcissistic families and narcissistic religious leaders, part 2. The crew goes even deeper, describing what narcissism looks like when it manifests in the church system. The various roles within a narcissistic family system are expounded on, and we take a deeper look at how those roles compare to various roles within the Black church. So stay tuned now for the continuation of similarities of narcissistic families and narcissistic religious leaders, part 2.
The Surviving the Black Church podcast represents the views and opinions of Jonathon Carrington, Nikki G, Hugh Kelly, and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as clinical advice. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establishes a therapist-client relationship. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any clinical questions. No, go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, and even outside of the church, this is some observation that I've been making on my own. In society, with I think there's a rise of the enablers right now. The enablers to sociopath, the enablers to narcissist, the enablers to that dark triad personality. The enablers are really leading the pack, so to speak, right now. They're the ones that are giving voice. They're the bullhorn to the narcissist, to the sociopath, to the psychopath. They're the bullhorns. They're the ones that cover. They're the cover. You know, if there's abuse, especially within the church, when there is sexual abuse and trauma involved, they are the ones that know that there has been a wrong wrought, and yet and still, either out of survival mode of I need to survive in this environment, so I will enable in order to survive, either out of adoration. I really am enamored with this leader and who they are and the call of God on their lives. Therefore, I will do whatever I need to do to make sure they stay in place, you know, or I don't want to lose my proximity to this leader. A role that comes to mind is the armor bearer, the one that carries in the Black church, the briefcase for the leader, or carries their juice, or carries their iPad, or is there to straighten out their skirt when they're about to get up and preach. They're the ones that take their clothes to the cleaners. The servant armor bearer. Those are the ones that see everything, the good, bad, and the ugly of the leadership. And they don't want to lose that position, or they don't want to be the new person that is talked about if they had to be removed from the church community. There are a lot of reasons why enablers enable, but the enablers are perpetuating a lot of abuses that are happening in society and abuses that are happening right within the church. And so, I mean, all of these roles, you know, outside of the scapegoat, so to speak, are very enabling roles to some degree. When I'm talking about within the church context. But I think we would be remiss if we did not highlight how a lot of these abuses would not occur if it was not for the enablers who allow it. And we might have to tap into this later or another episode about the Stockholm syndrome and what that looks like with enablers, you know. But it is an interesting situation, and it's happening more than we think. You got it right on the tip of your tongue. Go for it, Hugh.
Yeah, I was about to say this is exactly how, for us, how anti-Blackness functions, in terms, or doesn't function, a better word, but or it's funny. I don't know if y'all heard about the LA city council controversy where that forced a bunch of people at LA City Council to resign. It was a bunch of Latino city council people who were recorded in a they wanted to get at like one of their rivals. They wanted to speak poorly of one of their rivals. So how she did it, and her name was Nuri Martinez, is she started going after his adopted black son. And she was calling him all kinds of things, all kinds of slurs, all kinds of things in Spanish. And it was targeted towards black. I mean, it was just an onslaught. And so I was just reminded, and there was a big thing. There were protests in LA. It's happened like the audio was released like a month or two ago. But I'm just reminded as to how in this system, enablers and anti-blackness, you have non-black people that are non-white people of color, BIPOCs, who are also quite anti-black themselves and build themselves off the backs of black people by even though as they're getting hit with racism and they have their own history of colonization themselves, I see it. It's like it's a way to kind of isolate and make black people feel like we're alone in this struggle. And so enablers are very, very key to understanding what you're going through, because I mean they are probably more deep in the whole of Stockholm syndrome than anyone else, quite frankly. They form oppression and build off the backs of the people that they're doing it to, in curry of the psychopath, of curry of the sociopath, right, in curry of the narcissist. As they're getting you know abused in the process themselves. Maybe it's not as horrendously as the scapegoat is getting it, but the enablers are very, very I would say they're the biggest cowards in this whole thing, outside of the actual side, the coward or psychopath, because Fanon has a word, and I think it's in The Wretched of the Earth, where he talks about them a little. They're a loser in the struggles, how he said it, and how he meant that is like they can be the most dangerous people to you in these dynamics, and that it doesn't function independently, and it takes a lot to hold up these kinds of systems. Yeah, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of different people to do it. And so it's really like, when you're getting out of these systems, it's a very lonely journey, because you have to basically get rid of everybody. And so it's really it's a very, 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 it can be lonely. It is lonely to break free of these systems because of the enablers. If you were just in a battle with you and the narc, you could just be in battle with you and the narc, but you have everybody feeling like that. They have everybody feeling like they're supposed to hate you and XYZ. And so, yeah, I think in the church system, it's very, very, it functions in an extremely similar way. A lot of different roles, even for children, you could be going up for an audition, and you have it could in the choir. So it functions in so many different. I'm trying to find other areas, because in the choir it really does it there, and I don't know if that might be for a later episode, but enablers are really, really, it's a weird spot, because it's like you don't want to be you against the world, but you have to be performing a critical analysis of everyone in these spaces in your life, quite frankly, before you tread out in an interpersonal relationship with them of any kind. I really think it's important to trust build in ways that are authentic, as opposed to desperately clinging for life in these systems.
Yeah. I just want to just speak to narcissistic enablement. I think it's I think it's very hard, and it's very complicated, particularly in a system where there's such a high control and a strong rigidity in the relationship between the narcissist and the enabler. And I think that is why it's so hard for enablers to really speak out and to stand up for themselves, because it's a zero-sum game where winners win and losers lose. And there is this the capacity for the enabler to really have the strength to really speak up is very low, because oftentimes with the enabler, they have been brainwashed and mind controlled and programmed to believe that they are the only one that can help and support the narcissistic leader. That they feel ultimately responsible for this, for the life of the leader that they that they are enabling. And when you apply the spiritual and the religious element on it, and to bring God into it, it adds even more control, even more control and even more power, because God said it and Jesus said it. And so that kind of brainwashing leads the enabler into this state of learned helplessness. And so if you add that, learned helplessness, and in Stockholm syndrome is really an experience where it's like this, it's like a psychic adaptation of oppression, where you are just so in this unconscious state where you are saying things that, this is great, this is okay. Like you're praising your adulation, but you're being abused. Like you're in this deep, like you're dissociated, disconnected so far from your sense of self that you're saying and doing things for your abuser while they're hurting and killing and stealing and destroying you at the same time. So there's this level of strength for the enabler is so low to the point where it's so hard for them to break free, and it can be almost impossible. It's like a stronghold. When they talk about that in the Bible about strongholds, it's such a stronghold. And they're on a severe level of codependency, on the spectrum of codependency. And it's only until they are able to address those issues that they will be able to break free from that very bounded, very stronghold of a relationship, but it's hard to be able to break free from that. And so I think we have to consider that as people are listening. It's like, how am I, I know that this is me, but how do I even come out of that? It's hard.
It's
you know that you feel used, that you feel unappreciated, that you're resentful, but at the same time you're still pouring back into the leadership, and you have to. You feel like it's a duty or responsibility.
And you know what?
Go ahead.
I just want to say really quickly, none of this is like, Jonathon, you said it before, like this is a shock to the nervous system. Like this is not something that can even be taken, like it's not even possible. So I want you to keep that in mind. I just want to say that to the listener, like this takes moving heaven and earth, and it's not something that you should feel like, you should feel shameful about going through this experience. I know that's how you're feeling, but it's not something to be taken lightly, and it is rebuilding your strength after these experiences it's going to be hard. And so I'm just trying to basically say, I would love for you to have grace with yourself in these experiences. Like, I don't want you to be beating yourself up for feeling like you're a weak person or whatever. I want you to really have grace for yourself, because you are really doing something that most people do not ever do in their lives, and that you are doing something that, you were doing great things. And so just keep going.
And one of the things I was going to say about enablers And this is what caught me off guard a lot of times when I was in the church structure I was in and did not realize that it mirrored that of a narcissistic family dynamic. When it comes to an enabler, or another name for that could be the flying monkey, which some people may resonate with as well. The enablers can be just as abusive, sometimes if not more, than the narcissists themselves. And because they're not the actual narc, you don't see them coming. Our walls are often down when we interact with enablers or flying monkeys, because they're not the head honcho, so to speak. They're not at the top of the food chain, so to speak. So our walls are down. But sometimes some of the abuse that I experienced was from the church mother, was from the prophet of the house. It wasn't necessarily just the actual pastor or the leader. They whispered things in my ear that I don't even know if the pastor knew, but they were just as abusive, just as traumatizing. And at first my guard was down. So there was full, ability to come in and enact that wound inside of me. And so I just want to say, yes, they enable and they facilitate a further reach for the narcissistic leader to do their bidding, but sometimes they actually carry it out themselves. And that term, flying monkey, is derived from the Wizard of Oz movie. If somebody's familiar with that, and there was a part where Dorothy and her friends were out and about, and the witch could not see that far. She could not see where Dorothy and her friends were, so she sent out a horde of flying monkeys to not only go and scope out where they were, because she could see Dorothy and her friends through the vision of the flying monkeys, but then she had the flying monkeys attack Dorothy and her friends, and attack really her friends, so that Dorothy was then isolated and alone and no support system. So what does that look like in a church environment where the flying monkey is been released by perhaps the leader's bidding, and you don't even think that the leader could be capable of that? But instead of them doing it, the bad cop, good cop type of analogy, they send someone else to do it. And it's to isolate you from truth. It's to isolate you from the awareness that this may not be a healthy church, to isolate you from the thought process of this may be dysfunctional and I need to do something about it. And so I just wanted to throw that in there when we talk about enablers, because they can be just as abusive as the leaders themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go a little bit more in terms of providing context to that maintenance, that relationship maintenance within the narcissistic relationship, it's all in an effort to maintain control.
Yes.
You have to remember, it's all about control. And flying monkeys, as Nikki described, there is an indirect way that the leader tries to maintain this sense of control over the membership. And it's an insidiousness that comes with it too, because there is, it attaches to blind spots. It comes from out of nowhere, but it also comes from a sense of niceness. It comes from a sense of, you can't really, it's covert. There's a covert operation that's at play in order to maintain that sense of control, but also kind of displacing that need for control through other parties, through other members, out of this need to be exposed, the leader being exposed or being detected for the abuse and the harm that they are putting out there. There's a term that's called abuse by proxy, which is kind of coming out of this idea of flying monkeys, but it's like trying to this maintenance of controlling and dominating and overpowering, but doing it in a way to weaponize We didn't talk about smear campaigns and all the different ways in which they try to abuse people without being responsible directly for the abuse. And then, I think I talked about the triangulation patterns that come up in this relationship maintenance. Turning people against each other, using scripture against people, and using hypotheticals and parables and different things to try to like distort and do all this type of crazy making type of behaviors within this abuse dynamic, all in the means of trying to control people without being questioned, without being confronted, without being challenged. And so a lot of this is happening, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, but we want to be able to give awareness and information about it, because this is a dynamic that does take place in a narcissistic relationship in the church, in community. And a lot of this is not, people are just not aware that this is happening. They know that they experience it, but they're not aware of it. So how do we begin to start naming the experience exactly for what it is? And so that we know how to do what we can about it. And so I wanted to mention the other roles, and then we can probably move more into like solutions, or just how do we deal with, like, what do we do about all of these roles and these functions and all these things that are being carried out. So we talked a little bit about the scapegoat, and I know that that's even a way to so when you think about scapegoats, those are the people that have been treated unfairly by the church, or we talked a little bit about church hurt, or they've been made to feel like they're not good enough for the church and they've left the church. So as we think about the system, and we have to think about members that are now outside of the system, we're touching on all the areas. And so you may come to the church environment and experience something in the church, and then you hear something in the church, and then that causes you to feel rejected or isolated or misunderstood or resentful or angry. And so you leave the church. And so some examples of scapegoats may be women, maybe the LGBTQ community, scapegoats. Who else would fit into this category of scapegoats, if anyone?
You might have gotten them all. No, probably didn't.
Yeah, women and LGBTQ seem to be the predominant categories of people that are often used in different sermons and different types of people's experiences.
Oh yeah, definitely in the church.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Singles as well sometimes.
Singles.
They are scapegoated in the church. Purity culture really does it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's a label, but the type of person I usually see as the scapegoat within in the church, and that's usually the individual or individuals who have the ability to see something's not right here.
Yep.
The empaths, and those who are very intuitive, those who are just feeling. They may not be able to catch up with what they feel, but they know something is not right. Every time they come, something's not right with this person. And I'm not necessarily talking about spiritual discernment where you can tell if this person has a demon or this person. I'm not talking about that. I mean, that can be for maybe another podcast or what have you. I don't really want to go down that street.
But maybe they see them as that though, right?
They could. But I tend to not go down that street, because oftentimes, like I said earlier, we tend to super spiritualize everything, that we don't see the natural components, the physiological components, the psychological components that are very real and are very present. And if everything is allocated to it's either a demon or an angel, then we're in trouble, because there's a lot of gray area in the middle, and that's what we need to see. But oftentimes they're the one that basically can smell the pastor's BS, the church mother's BS. They can see the so-called prophet of God is actually saying God said this and that, because they want to abuse and manipulate certain people. And those scapegoats and again, these roles are not something you sign up for. You don't
Right.
come into the church, you don't come into your family of origin and raise your hand and said, I like to be the golden child. I would love to be the scapegoat. You don't choose them. They are energetically given to you without your knowledge. Oftentimes, it's in your family of origin, you don't realize these things until way later in your life, if at all.
Right.
And within the church context, you really don't realize this until it gets too traumatic or too hard to deal with in the church and you have to exit. And even if you exit, you may not see it unless you start to come into resources that actually highlight this. But the scapegoat individual, they see, they feel, they can perceive, and oftentimes they take the courage to stand up and to question and to say, hey, this, and they point out this is not right. Oftentimes the scapegoat is the one often that are the carriers of the dysfunction of the family and the carriers of the dysfunction within the church context. So the scapegoat person could actually be an intercessor, a person who intercedes because they see this and they see this around that person. They're the ones who, they may be close proximity to the leadership and they come home with a heavy heart every night, leaving church because they know something's not right. They see the pastor going down the wrong path. And so, but they carry, a lot of times they carry things that are not theirs to carry. And those are the ones that usually are the first ones to say, okay, I can't take this anymore. I have to go. But it's often after they've been ostracized, demonized, blamed, deserted, often shamed and ridiculed in the messages in front of the actual church. These individuals, they feel it deeply. And I can say that because I've functioned in this role in my family of origin and in the churches I used to be a part of. So this is a real thing. And, you know, the traumatic effects that they deal with functioning in that role is low self-esteem, you know, depression, anxiety, not feeling good enough, things of that nature, just because they see and they feel. And oftentimes what they perceive is accurate. They just don't know what to do with it next. So
yeah. And I would also add that scapegoats also can be the truth seekers of society.
Yes.
Truth tellers.
They are the truth tellers, the people that are able to, that are coming here to really expose the truth or to shine the light onto the world, and that is their primary purpose. They are here to do that, and I think that they're able to see past the lie that's being projected by the narcissistic leader. They're able to kind of see. They can see through all of the facade. They can see all, you know, the appearances that we talked about earlier. All the stuff that is pretty much put into the frame of the presentation of the narcissistic leader. And unfortunately, there's not that much that the scapegoat can do to change how the narcissistic leader perceives the scapegoat, because there is already this perceived image or this perceived identity that the scapegoat, that the narcissist has about the scapegoat. And so the only thing that they can do, the scapegoat can do, is to create a sense of distance, and come to the realization that it is not their fault, that they have
It's not at all.
Been put into this position by the narcissistic leader. So I just wanted to add that point in. Go ahead, Nikki.
One more thing that is very, very important for those who feel like, oh, that's been my role in my family and in the church. Oftentimes, because most scapegoats are very intuitive and empathic, they have a desire. Let's start with the family of origin. When you see the dysfunction and you see the toxicity and you're empathic and you feel it, you want to help. You want to save, you want to fix, and you take that and you put that in a church context, you want to help the pastor. You want to help the church leader and the prophet, even if they're doing things that you know is abusive. Well, I'm going to go on my 40-day fast. I'm going to fast all year. I'm going to stay at church. I'm going to say yes to everything. I'm going to do everything because I know that the pastor might be going through some hardships right now, but we just going to pray him through. We're going to fast for it. We're going to, and you keep coming back and you keep saying, but I just believe I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be part of God's army to pray for this pastor and this leadership. And you take all the dysfunction on your back. You put that cape on and you think if you remain, then you can fix it. And if there's abuse and there's narcissism, and the thing about it is, we that see and have been stung by the narcissistic bug, we cannot save the narcissist. That is a decision that they have to make to actually deal with their dysfunction within and work through that. You cannot make that decision for them. And we cannot save the churches that are faltering and dysfunctioning because we see. Just because you see does not mean it's your responsibility. That's the word I'm looking for, to salvage the environment, especially at your own expense, mentally, physically, emotionally. And oftentimes scapegoats find themselves flowing in this role so subconsciously we don't even realize that we've put it on our back to fix it all. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm being a realist and say, if the narcissist has to do the work to salvage themselves, and the narcissistic pastor needs to do the work to salvage themselves first, and then see if they can still function in the church. In other words, if you are in an abusive church and the leader is 9 times out of 10 exhibiting narcissistic behaviors and the environment looks like what we've been describing, it's not your responsibility to save that place, honey. It's not. I just want to free you right now. You've been toiling, you've been crying, you've been praying, you've been enduring for years in that place. And it's not your responsibility. Let that load be lifted off of you. And the energy you put in to try to salvage and fix all that's dysfunctional in the midst, start pouring that into yourself. Start pouring that into your own family. Start pouring that into your relationship with your God and having yourself experience healing and recovery. As scapegoats, we have to say, I am going to divorce myself from this role. This is not my true identity.
Scapegoats have strength. They have strength that it's a strength that is beyond. It is beyond powerful, which is why they're the scapegoat. And the narcissistic leader sees that, knows that.
Absolutely.
That they are very strong, which is why that's why the leader comes at them so hard. The scapegoats of society come at them so hard because they know their strength. And you're right in terms of you're not responsible. You were never responsible for them.
Ever.
It is not your responsibility. It is not your responsibility for their anger towards you. It is not it's not your responsibility to take on their need to control you. That is not your responsibility. That is
not your problem.
Your responsibility is yourself. Your responsibility is to understand and know what your strength is, to know what your worth is, your value is. Your responsibility is to build up a network of people who will support you, that will love you, that will understand what you are going through. People that can pour that love back into you, that can support you, that can help you to heal yourself.
Yes.
You hear me?
And even though spiritually, some of you may be saying, but I know I'm called to intercede. I know I'm called to help bring healing to people and to groups and parts of society. I'm not negating that at all, but not at the expense of you hurting yourself and wounding yourself. Don't abuse yourself trying to help others.
Mm-hmm.
Don't abuse yourself trying to fix others. That is not your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Release them to God. Allow
Mm-hmm.
God to do what he's going to do with them, and allow them to make the choice that they want to be healed, that they want to recover, that they want to function in a better way when it comes to relating with people. If they don't make that decision, you cannot do that for them. And this it's touching a deep place in me, because I know what that's like to feel like I can save everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I can help everybody. I got so much love in my heart and so much empathy, but that has to be balanced and tethered. And a lot of times we don't do that. And because a lot of us are like that and are in the church, within the Black church, who we are can easily be exploited by leaders that just see the yes emanating out of us. And I'll do whatever. I'll sign up for whatever ministry. I'll stay late. I'll be there when no one else will be there. And we're suffering, and we're negating who we are and our own recovery and development and healing for a ministry or a minister or a community that really is not in the business to help and support and serve. They're in the business of take and leverage the power dynamics. You deserve, coming into this new year, you deserve to serve you, to lift you up, to honor you, to equip you. There's been so many years you've been serving everything and everybody else. And you've even thought, oh, it's going to be selfish if I start working on me, loving on me, working on the areas that I need to work on for myself. And it's not selfish. It's actually love. The same love you're pouring out to others, can you pour it into you this year? Can you press reset and say, it's about me this year? I don't know. I ain't trying to preach. I'm just throwing it out there.
It's too late for that now.
Sorry. I ain't trying to preach.
No, don't apologize. Yes. Oh my God. Like there's so much to that. Like that endless well of I have to spread joy and love and harmony, and I have to be the one that keeps the peace, is something that the scapegoat feels an endless obligation to. And it's just this really maladaptive experience. And it's not your experience anymore. It doesn't have to be. And it's Nikki said it's not selfish, but maybe it is if you do that. And maybe that's okay. And that's okay. That's fine. It's like loving all parts of yourselves, the parts that were used to whip your back. Loving all parts of those yourselves is so integral to, I find, breaking free of these horrible dynamics and these dynamics that were not ever yours to claim. It was not ever yours to claim. Let the leaders own their own shame. Let them own who they are. Let them do that.
Yes.
And focus on you and people that are there for you and that can see you and that can hear you and that want to be a part of you, of your experience, and not just wanting to, eat your experience alive every day. Or that curiosity, that care, that generosity into yourself. And it's just the first step is to just pour that shit into yourself, and you will be at a place that you never thought you could be at. And you're not a part of their problem anymore, And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And I'm going to, and I appreciate you all sharing this. I'm going to speak to this as I'm speaking to myself, as I'm speaking to both you, Hugh, and Nikki. Abuse and bad behavior is a choice. And that is a choice that the narcissist is making, that your church leader is making, and you are not responsible for any of those choices. You also have to be mindful that your narcissistic leader, whoever that might be, whether it be your family member, your parent, church member, church leader, they have likely been ignoring you, been using you, been mistreating you, been abusing you for many years, many days, many months. And whether you have learned how to put other people on a pedestal, or you have this tendency to see relationships as something more special or more important or more valuable than what they actually are, there might be a likelihood that you may be still dealing with past hurt, past trauma. So I would not only learn how to limit your interactions with abusive people, I would encourage you to look back into your past to see if you might have been idealizing in your relationships with other people because you've had some unresolved trauma or abuse or neglect from your childhood or from your adolescence or even from your adulthood years, and exploring how that past hurt may give you a completely different perspective on life and relationships. And when you begin to understand and gain clarity, understanding of some of those patterns that were formed in earlier parts of your life, then you can start making time and investing in yourself, taking care of yourself, accepting yourself exactly for who you are, all of your flaws, all of your mistakes, all of your shortcomings, all of your needs, all of your wants, everything that there is about you. Because when you begin to love yourself and care for yourself, that's the first step to healing. That's the first step of being able to integrate all of those parts that are conflicting within yourself. You know, to the point where you begin to understand why you developed this relationship with this narcissistic leader. Why did you develop this relationship with this narcissistic church? And being able to take the steps that are necessary to improve your own well-being so that you can start creating a better life for yourself, you know, so that you can start developing relationships outside of this system, you know, and deal with that pain of being ignored, deal with that pain of being dismissed and being invalidated and being minimized and being ridiculed and belittled by authority figures in your life, to help you to better understand your relationship with this narcissistic figure, you know, and to also come into this understanding that we're all human and nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect. And when we begin to kind of be triggered to go into that idealization and that magical thinking, to believe that there is some greater force and some powerful force, some bigger force that's outside of ourselves that can restore our sense of peace or our understanding or pour that back into us, to be able to take a step back and to accept the fact that we are complex human beings on this planet and that we carry both positive and negative qualities and attributes that exist in all of us, that we can coexist in this world at the same time with people. But that doesn't mean that we need to externalize our wounds with other people to the point where we can not externalize those wounds, but begin to work on those wounds, to work on healing that core wound of needing approval or needing validation or needing acceptance and appreciation. We can work on that so that we can develop that sense of alignment and peace within ourselves and be at peace with the complexity and the nuances that make us who we are. And then we can begin to look outside of ourselves and say, oh, that's who I'm dealing with. But that starts with understanding yourself first. That starts with healing the wounds, the core wounds that lead to your own insecurities, to the point where you won't bond with someone else's insecurities. And so And if you need assistance with that, well, seek out, invest in yourself enough to hire a coach like Nikki or Hugh, or invest in a therapist like myself, to be able to learn how to integrate all of those complicated, difficult feelings that you have within yourself, and so that you can create healthy relationships with your God, and the God that of your understanding, the God that really understands you and that sees you and that accepts you and that validates you, that pours into you. And so you can come into that direct relationship with God and begin to learn how to connect to others in a way where you can get that authentic connection that you desire and that you yearn for and that you long for, and learn how to resource yourself so that can put you on a trajectory of life that can lead you into happiness and good health and well-being and prosperity.
It's not easy moving forward after you've been through some of these experiences, especially if you've come from a family of origin that has been very narcissistic, and it took a while, or maybe you didn't even realize it until you found yourself in a church that kind of mirrored a lot of your family of origin toxic dynamics. And once you realized the church was abusive and the leaders were abusive, and then you had to come out of that and figure out what to do with this pain and start doing some of the things Jonathon said, you're like, whoa, this track back to my family. It's like, oh, this is a lot. And it can feel like a lot sometimes. You know, the topics we cover here on this podcast are heavy topics. We realize that, but we also realize what's at stake. What's at stake is our people are suffering in silence within the Black church in a lot of these areas that we've been covering. And we're just willing to step out and have the difficult conversations so that the door of freedom and healing can be open, and we can actually start to come back home to ourselves. I'm not saying coming back home to ourselves minus a relationship with God. That is your choice and agency to decide if that's what fits you. But there is a deficit in our community when it comes to religious abuse, narcissistic spiritual leaders, cult leaders, and we've walked through these type of things ourselves, and to see our people continue to hurt without the awareness, without the psychoeducation, without the resources, it hurts my heart. So, hey, we're going to have these deep conversations. Throw it in your iPod, go work out. I don't know if this is a workout combo, but somewhere where you can really take it in and digest it and think about it and research and learn so that you can come more into light and love and recovery. You know, there's so much more to the narcissistic family dynamic. There's, you know, we're talking about the roles, we've talked about them, the enabler, we talked about the scapegoat. There's the golden child, the one that's more preferred, gets the special privileges within the family dynamic. There's the lost child. That's the one that is forgotten about, that's overlooked. That's the one, you know, the invisible child. There are many components to a whole narcissistic family system, and those same components are in oftentimes an abusive church dynamic with those same traits. And I hope we said enough that you can start the journey of looking further into this. You might want to get Chuck DeGroat's book called When Narcissism Comes to Church, and he describes this in more detail. Just to get started. But this is a real thing. And this is happening in not just the small churches on Martin Luther King Boulevard in whatever state you reside in. It's also happening in the big churches that come on BET, that come on the Word Network, okay, that come on TBN. that are right down the street, the most popular ministries by some of the most popular and outspoken leaders of our time. Some of these traits are sitting right in those pews. And I'm not here to start calling out names and things of that nature. If we have to on this pod, we will from time to time, but we want you to understand the dynamics behind all the smoke screen, behind all the shouting and the demonstrative acts that happen within the Black church. And I'm not belittling those. I know those are important and those are staples in our community and the history of the Black church. But when you pull the curtain further, there are these psychodynamics that are happening. These are psychological things that are happening. These are interpersonal relationships that have been affected, and it's real. And yes, prayer is essential and it's good and it's healthy for those who are believers, but it's often not enough when it comes to this type of trauma that people have walked through after going through these type of abusive experiences. So you can still pray if you want. That's a beautiful thing. But pray and possibly seek a mental health professional who understands religious abuse, spiritual abuse, religious trauma. Connect with a community of people who have walked down these same paths and say, yeah, it's real and it's happened to me. This is why we do this work. This is why we're here, because we want to help our people. And it may be an unconventional way to do so, but nevertheless, it is important to do so. So I just wanted to say that as, closing remarks and just throw that in there.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nikki, and thank you for sharing that. And I think we're getting to wrapping down to the end of the episode, and I just wanted to say that all of this is not to take away what you believe in, your cultural values, your religious values. What this episode is doing is that we are dispensing information that the behaviors that you may have heard, the dynamics within systems, church systems, family systems, it can be destructive, it can be damaging to people. And if you're hearing this, it's important to ask for help. If you're hearing this and you recognize anything we've been talking about, any of these dynamics in your own family, in your own church, it's not to demonize people, it's to bring awareness to behavior, because it is a behavioral experience. It's best to reach out for help, but also if you can't do that, to figure out a way to create some emotional distance between yourself and the toxicity that you're experiencing as much as you can. If that's all that you're capable of doing right now, is to remove yourself as much as you can out of the situation, and then begin to understand what is happening so that you can protect yourself from being harmed any further. That's all that this is doing. You can be a slave to the system if you keep going back to the system. And we don't want you to be a slave to anything. So Hugh, do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share before we close out this episode?
Yeah. Know your system, just like you just said. Understand where you belong and why you belong there. And it's a trite saying, but go where not where you're tolerated, but where you're cherished. Go where you are cherished and abide by that. So yeah, I just want to keep it short and simple, and just really to know your systems and go where you're cherished.
I love that. Yeah. Go
Not
where
where
your
you're
chair is. Go ahead, Nikki.
not where you're tolerated, but where you're celebrated.
Go where you're appreciated. And that all of that is about knowing your worth, knowing your value, that you are worthy, you are a valuable person, you're a valuable human being. And to know and understand that at the core of your being, know your worth, know your value, because that will begin to help you to start identifying and understanding and even honoring and respecting your own experience. And to come away from the silence and into the truth of what is happening. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope that this was helpful to you. If you need, take time for yourself. Go back and listen to the episode again if you like. We do have a Facebook group called Surviving the Black Church. If you feel a need to connect and reach out for support, ask for help, there is a group that is designed exclusively for you. So thank you so much, and we will be back for another episode.
Thank you for listening to Surviving the Black Church podcast with your hosts, Jonathon, Nikki, and Hugh. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode. Until next time, take care.